So we'll start. We have a packed hour of learning together. But before we begin, I think it's important to mark as the sun is setting and the Memorial Day in Israel and for Jewish communities around the world of Yom HaShoah, as we remember the 6 million Jews who were murdered by the Nazi regime. And so we'll mark that moment tomorrow at Shabbat services. But I think it's really important just to mark here as well. And I know some of you on the screen have personal connections to the Holocaust. I was wondering if anyone's remembering a loved one at this moment and want to share a little story of someone. We had Phyllis speak about her husband at Kristallnacht this past fall. But is there anyone else that has someone they're remembering and just wants to share a story, a quick story?
Just a subject that's always been very close to my heart, but I have no direct connection.
Right. And your son is an expert as well. Yeah, so.
He defends tomorrow.
Wow, exciting. Good luck to him. Any other? I don't have any. Like my family, we call ourselves Mayflower Jews because we've been in America for all my grandparents, all my great grandparents were born in America.
Wow.
So I don't have those personal stories, but I was wondering if anyone else does.
My parents came in 1936.
Mm.
And my grandmother came to visit them, went back to Germany, and then got out on the last boat for free.
So they saw they were ready. They saw they were ready on the wall. Someone told them how did they share
I
the
don't
reason?
have all those answers.
Mm-hmm.
They got married 6 months before they left Germany.
Disappeared.
Yeah.
Floating away.
Carol, I think you're talking, but I think we can't hear you. Sorry. Maybe we come back in or come back out, and so.
Carol does that a lot.
Well, Carol, maybe try back in.
Why is he picking on you so much today?
I know, right? But I think as we begin the study of Israel for the next 3 weeks, I think it's actually poignant that we begin on Yom HaShoah. Many believe that the reason we have a state of Israel is because of the Holocaust. And I think perhaps that is one reason why we have this state for the Jewish peoplehood. Maybe it was an impetus for us for the creation. But as we know, there was a Zionist movement way before the Holocaust. There was the dreams of Herzl had, and the Zionist Congress took place before 6 million Jews were killed. And so we will talk about, I think the Holocaust will always play a little bit of a backdrop in the creation of the state of Israel. And I want us to I'm going to try to push our narratives a little bit. Is that the reason we have this home? For the Jewish people. So this curriculum is developed by Shalom Hartman Institute and the American Reform Zionist Association. I know many of you have heard of ARTSA before. Rabbi Josh Weinberg spoke at a Shabbat service a couple of months ago, and we've been an ARTSA congregation supporting Reform Zionist movements in America, North America, as well as Israel. And we are proud to be an ARTSA congregation. How many of you have heard of Shalom Hartman Institute? Has anyone studied at the Shalom Hartman Institute? Okay, Mark and Carol. Carol, do you want to try to talk?
Can you hear me this time?
Yes.
Okay.
Carol, do you want to just explain what you're studying, and I can have Mark share as well?
Well, I did it a number of years ago. I went to Israel for a 2-week period and studied there. Most of the course was geared to people who were Hebrew teachers, etc. But I took the course. It's wonderful. I mean, it's a wonderful, wonderful program. And we did tour around also to certain places that fit in with what we were studying.
Definitely. And so the Hartman is, I lost people, sorry. Yeah, Mark, do you want to share your experience?
Yeah,
I went there in June 2017 for a program. They have two summer programs. One is basically a rabbinic program, and another is a lay program. And it was for about a week, and similar to what Carol experienced. It was lectures, it was visiting optional places. But what was remarkable about it was the topic they chose was 2017 was 100 years after the Balfour Declaration, 70 years after the UN partition plan, and of course, 50 years after the unification of Jerusalem and the Six-Day War. And they spent, and the people who were on the video were very much involved as well, time talking about that. And they talked a lot about Jewish peoplehood.
Yeah.
But not only that, but what did each of those things mean for Israel? What do they mean for the rest of world Jewry? And it was remarkable. And I was going to go again, but two things. One, I had a procedure that I couldn't go, and then the pandemic came. So I'm looking forward to maybe going next June.
Definitely.
They're good people, and we've had them come to us. We've had Josie.
Yeah, we've had, right.
Yeah, so, yeah.
And so the Hartman Institute is a leading center of Jewish thought and education, serving Israel and North American Jews. They want to strengthen Jewish peoplehood, which we're going to talk a lot about, identity and pluralism. And what I think is remarkable about the Hartman Institute is you don't usually get secular, reform, Orthodox, modern Orthodox, conservative Jews around the table all at once studying the same text. It's a text-based institute, plenty of text, but it is a melting pot of Jewish backgrounds. And they also have created a Jewish-Arab dialogue as well. And so this is all the people that we will hear from in the videos are either teachers at Hartman Institute or are participants from the Hartman Institute as well. And so this curriculum has been developed. It's 11 units. We're only going to touch, I want to see how it goes. So we're only going to touch 3 different parts of this, and they have different curriculum as well. This one's about Jewish peoplehood and connecting North American Jews and Israeli Jews, and seeing, are we speaking the same language? Are we sharing the same words? Of course, we'll look into politics in this conversation, anti-Semitism in this conversation, but it's also really trying to see, how do we strengthen our relationship? At times, we feel that these two groups, Israeli Jews and North American Jews, are entirely different communities with different needs. And once perhaps we were much closer together than we have been. Perhaps it's politics, perhaps it's religion, perhaps it's distance, and we don't feel the connection anymore. And that's what we'll be investigating about a little bit tonight. So to begin, fill in the blank. Israel is blank. You can put in the chat box if you feel like it. So Israel is, give me, what was that? What's is for you? The blank after is.
Go in the chat box.
Put in the chat box if you can.
Okay.
We have it.
Can't do the chat.
If you can't do the chat box, we'll call on you, but I'm just going to give it time for people just to reflect for a second. And then I'll ask people to maybe explain what they thought. Great. So we have a couple coming in. So we have Annette Raddick is an amazing country. We have from Carol Cohen, Israel is the homeland of the Jewish people. Jackie Master says, Israel is our heart. David Galish says, Israel is very important to me. Marcia Lazar says, is a safe harbor. Any other ones? If you have trouble chatting, that's fine. You can shout them out as well if you would like. So anyone who wrote in the chat box, do you want to share why you have your definition? Carol Cohen, the homeland of the Jewish people.
If it has a negative thing, he says Israel is in big trouble.
Anyone read Thomas Friedman's article, don't know what I'm talking about.
Steve said Israel's in big trouble. That was the article yesterday about I think I read, was that a couple days ago or yesterday? They all blend a little bit. All right, we'll get to that. Carol, homeland of the Jewish people. That's your first thing, Israel is.
Yeah, well, I live here. This is my place, but I think all Jews, it's their home. When you go there, they're your people. I mean, they're your people, they're your home, even if they're from different parts of the world. They are Jews, and you have a special connection to them.
Great. Carol, do you think, is Israel home to you? Would you say Israel is home to you?
It's like I have a split personality. It is my Jewish home, but it is not my home. My home is the United States.
Okay.
My Jewish home is Israel.
I think what you're trying to say, it's your spiritual home.
Yes.
Okay. So Jean, is Israel a home to you?
I'm sorry?
Is Israel home? Would you?
I view it in the very same way that Carol does. It's a spiritual home. Of all the countries that we have visited, it's the one place where you feel the most comfortable. As a tourist, it's almost as you belong there.
Great.
We've had comments made to us by Israeli soldiers. I mean, one sticks out in my mind. We happened upon a Israeli tank division training, and we were able to mingle with the soldiers, and we were thanking them. And one of the soldiers said that we are doing this for you also, and it was heartfelt. So that makes you feel very much a part of the land itself.
Yeah, I want to play with that a little bit. So Jean, you're saying that they're doing this for you as well. What are they doing? What does that mean?
They're doing that for us as American Jews. If we were from England, from Great Britain, and they would have been doing it for a British Jew, they were doing it for world Jewry, not just for themselves as Israel.
And they're saying because this is a place that you can come to.
Yes.
Following up on that, I think Robert Frost once wrote a poem or something that said, home is the place where you go to, they have to take you in. Israel is the only country in the world that has to take me in. So that means something to me. And it's more than spiritual, it's physical in a way. So I agree with Carol and Jean, there is a spiritual aspect. Our experience when we were on the Golden Heights and we met a group of soldiers who were from they were Dutch originally, and the same thing, we thanked them. And they looked at us and they said, we thank you. So there is a peoplehood in that relationship. And you could have conversations there very more comfortably than you can in other countries.
Right. Any other thoughts before we look at a little text? Yeah, Carol, please.
Well, as I'm saying it, and as I'm looking at this group, I feel this way. I think most of the group does. I don't know if my children do. I think that's the difference, and that's what was brought out when the Hartman Institute was talking about it, is that I think my children think of their home. They've been to Israel, they enjoyed it, but it's not the same feeling. I don't think.
Right, and certainly, if I may add, my grandchildren who are all in their 20s don't have, and most of them have been to Israel. They don't feel that safety thing about it.
Right, they think it's another country, or it's a place that's has a lot of Jews, and that's okay.
They
And
loved-
perhaps,
Love Tel Aviv, loved it.
right, so I wonder what's changed, right? And so we're gonna delve deep into that. Why is it perhaps, and I think for me, and I find Israel is a home for me. And I love Israel. Israel is an important part of my Jewish learning, but also experiencing the Jewish calendar and experiencing Jewish people. I always reflect on, I love going to Israel knowing, like, you know what? My waiter is Jewish. How often can you say that, right? Or like the beggar on the street's Jewish. The bus driver is Jewish.
That's why I said the safe harbor. It's the only place in the world that I can go and not feel like I'm the other.
Perfect segue, Marcy. And oh yeah, Jackie, please, and then we'll, yes.
She's muted. You
Jackie,
have
you're
to
muted.
unmute.
I know, I'm gonna see if I can change.
Technology is very hard when you're over 70.
No, everyone did
It's
a
not
great job.
respond. Okay, now
Oh,
we
there you
know
go.
it's respond.
There you
I think-
go.
I think Stephen and I have a different feeling because we actually have family that were smart enough to go from Europe to to Israel, and so it's a different feeling when we go. We go and stay with them. When you have mishpacha, when you have family, you have even more than it's a home, but it's an extension of your family, and we've had that pleasure for maybe 20 times in our lifetimes.
Yeah.
We
Right,
too
so-
feel very at home there.
Right, so you feel at home because you have your home is your family, right? It protects you. But I want to challenge us a little bit, Marcy, what you said, that Israel is our safe haven, a harbor, right? Well, it is, right? We can be there. I wonder if putting, I always struggle with, like, Israel's our safety net. If something terrible happens here, I can go to Israel. Is that a great way to look at Israel?
Be all crowded if we all ran there at once.
It would be very crowded, yes. But is that the reason we have Israel? Just in case. Is it a just in case for us? I want to make sure that Israel is perhaps not a just in case, but something that we are proud of, and something which we can be a just in case, but that's not the reason I'm going there, to run away from something else.
I think it gives comfort to know it's there.
Mhm.
I think that we've been there many times. I've been there without Marcy. She's been there without me. But I do feel a little conflicted because sometimes when I'm there, I think about not being good enough or not being the kind of Jew that makes up maybe the majority of Israel. As a Reform Jew, as a liberal, having issues about their politics. And I think that impacts the younger generation too when they think about it.
Definitely. So let's get into this a little bit more deeply. And we're going to kind of look at the text that if you were able to watch the video that Tal Becker kind of pulled out in his lecture. Tal Becker is a senior fellow at the Shalom Hartman Institute. He's been a part of the Israeli Ministry of Foreign Affairs as a legal advisor and a chief peace negotiator at the Hartman Institute. And one of the texts that he brings is Exodus 1:8-11, which we know is the very beginning of Exodus. It's a common, we know it pretty well. A new king arose over Egypt who did not know Joseph, and he said to his people, "Look, the Israelite people are much too numerous for us." This is the first text where we have become the other. This is the first text where we say, this is us versus them. In the book of Genesis, that doesn't happen. We are not the other. Here, we create a space and say, we're different. We are different. Only one place in the entire Torah, we have this phrase, Am B'nai Yisrael, the children of Israel. We are the different group, a nation of different people. Am B'nai Yisrael. So the otherness factor starts in our own text, and we are a minority, right? We weren't that in the Genesis. We weren't that in Genesis, but here we have an experience of otherness, which is important because as we are otherness, we know what happens when we become other. And so he also brings out the idea in the book of Esther, right? That we are an ethnic group. Haman comes and says, why do you, when they listened to them, they told Haman in order to see where, when Haman saw that Mordecai would not kneel or bow low to him, Haman was filled with rage, but he disdained to lay hands on Mordecai alone, having been told who Mordecai was. In the first month, he went to King Ahasuerus, and they said, there is a certain people scattered and dispersed among them, other people in all provinces of your realm, whose laws are different from those of any other, people who do not obey the king's laws. It is not in your majesty interest to tolerate them. And so here we have this idea that we're not just the other, but we don't act like other people. We have different rules. And this idea of otherness is a really key factor in Jewish peoplehood. What combines us together is our otherness, right? We, in other groups, we might not have, we are Jewish people because we act differently. We have different laws. People look at us differently. And so Tal basically says, this is the origins of Jewish peoplehood. And the origins of a Jewish homeland, what we know about it, comes here. So can someone read this for me?
The Lord said to Abram, go forth from your native land and from your father's house to the land that I will show you. I will make of you a great nation, and I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you shall be a blessing.
We've read this many times. This is the origin of the land. This is a place. And what happens when you get to that land? What happens?
Oh,
What's the question?
in Genesis. there
No,
was a-
according to this text, what happens? God says to Abraham, go forth to your native land, to your father's house, and I'm going to show you a land. And what will happen when you get to that land?
I'm a great nation.
Right? You will be blessed.
Great name.
Exactly. What else? And you'll be a blessing.
Right.
So if Abraham didn't go to that land, like, is Abraham only a great nation in that space, according to this text?
Yes.
Yeah. You will only be blessed in this land.
Mm-hmm.
This is your land. You will only be blessed here. You will only have a relationship with God in this land. Genesis 12, 12th chapter, we say this is your land, and the only place that you will have a relationship with God is in this land,
Mm-hmm.
the land of Israel. However, same chapter later, we get there, and there was a famine in the land. And Abram went down to Egypt to sojourn there, for the famine was severe in the land. So
How blessed were we if that's what happened?
Right, so there's a paradox that is set up in the same chapter of this is your homeland.
Mm-hmm.
You will be blessed in this homeland. You will only be blessed in this homeland. But when you get there, oh, what a blessing that is. We instantly have
Famine.
a famine, and we have someone leaving the homeland. Right, so right here, we have Judaism, or not Judaism. We have a land where God has blessed us, but there's a famine. And this idea that you might not need it here.
I'm taking temp.
You might not have land here. You might not be in a place of the land that's so great either. And so you need to leave the land. Right here is the paradox of Jewish peoplehood. In the same chapter, in the same, in 10 verse difference. So do we need to be in this land, or do I not? If the land's not that great, if there's already a famine, I'm going to go someplace else.
How do you then explain that the whole purpose of the Exodus was for the Israelites to go to the land of Israel. And that is basically the sort of subtext of the whole rest of the Torah. Well, everything that happens is on the way to Israel. So how does that fit into the fact that it's really not our land, but it is our land? Or
Well, right, but the majority of the book of Torah doesn't take place in Israel, right? We are wandering. Only Genesis really talks about this land.
right.
And so I think there's an interesting point to that, right? Our development as a people, our creation as a people did not take place in Israel.
Mhm.
We became a people when we were outside of Israel. We've always had desire. There was always a desire for all these land laws that you will follow will happen only when you get to Israel, or what that was the land there. But our development of who we are took place on that journey, as Moses did. But if our land, if we believe that this is our homeland, there's a challenge already saying, but do we really need to be there if we want our developing as a people? Is this the home of the Jewish people when actually we were able to develop pretty amazingly outside of the home as well? And here's another biblical text from Jeremiah. Can someone read chapter verse 4 through 8 for me?
Thus said the Lord of hosts, the God of Israel, to the whole community which I exiled from Jerusalem to Babylon: build houses and live in them, plant gardens and eat their fruit. Take wives and beget sons and daughters, and take wives for your sons, and give your daughters to husbands, that they may bear sons and daughters. Multiply there, do not decrease, and seek the welfare of the city to which I have exiled you, and pray to the Lord on its behalf, for in its prosperity you shall prosper.
So Jeremiah is in exile within Babylonia, and what's he saying to these people?
Make this your home for now.
Yeah, this is your home.
Yeah.
Whose home is it? Is it your home? Just your home?
No, it's a home of the Babylonians, but it's also where the Jews are going to be for now, and so they have to adjust.
100%, right? Adjust. It's not just for you, but beget your sons and daughters, and your sons should take wives and daughters, and multiply there. Do not decrease. Create your homeland here. Create home here. It's okay to be in exile. And Jackie, can you read just verse 8 for me?
For thus said the Lord of hosts, the God of Israel, let not the prophets and diviners in your midst deceive you, and pay no heed to the dreams they dream, for they prophesy to you in my name falsely. I did not send them, declares the Lord. For thus said the Lord, when Babylon's 70 years are over, I will take note of you, and I will fulfill to you my promise of favor to bring you back to this place.
So here we have the prophets who might be the first Zionists. They're saying, actually, go there, go to Israel. Now, don't listen to Jeremiah. They might be false prophets. Go back there. But Jeremiah is saying, actually, live in exile, live in diaspora. We can create our dreams here. We can create a vision for Judaism outside of that Israel space. But in the same text, or later in the Psalms, we have this very familiar chapter as well. Could someone read that for me?
By the rivers of Babylon, there we sat and wept as we thought of Zion. There on the poplars we hung up our lyres, for our captors asked us there for songs, our tormentors for amusement. Sing us one of those songs of Zion. How can we sing a song of the Lord on alien soil? If I forget you, O Jerusalem, let my right hand wither.
And so we have these other people that are mourning not being in Israel. In Jeremiah, we have saying that you will be prosperous, you will create beautiful land and homelands, or a home for you and your offspring and your offspring's offspring. And then we hear in the Psalms, which is a beautiful psalm, I am mourning that I'm not there. We need to go back there. In our text, we create Jewish peoplehood in different spaces. Right? Many times we think, oh, Jewish peoplehood really are perhaps together or always like in a same location, but actually we read that we can be at different places, we can prosper in different places as well. And so I want to stop one thing. So we're going to watch a quick clip, or 17 minutes, of people reflecting on this and what does it mean to have this home. Oh. Can you see that?
Mhm.
Yeah. Can you hear it?
Mhm. This is what we watched.
No here. We didn't hear it.
I don't hear anything.
I can't hear it, Rabbi.
No. Neither can your grandson, David.
I can hear a camera, but I can't hear the movie. Zachary, come here.
1 second, I apologize.
Oh, people want to see you. I gotta find you.
Aw,
Look how big he's gotten.
wow.
I can't hear it.
All right, this should work this time.
To continue this, what is the idea? From no home to two homes. How do we sustain a sense of Jewish peoplehood in a reality of two homes? To continue this conversation, we're joined by Angela Buchtal and Dotan Arieli, rabbis in North America and in Israel. Angela, let me begin with you. What does the idea of America as home mean to you? And if it is home, what is Israel to you?
So I'm very familiar with having two homes. Like many American Jews and Americans and Israelis, my home is not where my birthplace was. I was actually born in South Korea and lived there for the first 5 years of my life. And when we moved to Tacoma, I remember that children at school would say, "Where are you from?" And I would say, "I'm from Korea."
Can you hear
And then
any?
when I went back
You
to
can't?
Korea
Can
when I was
you?
a few years
Yeah,
later,
this is out.
I remember all the little children there said, "So where are you from?" And I said, "Well, I'm from Korea." And they said, "No, you're not." And I remember going to my mother in tears and saying, "I don't have a home." And she said, "No, Angela, you can make a home anywhere you want." She said, "Home is where you have love and acceptance and family." She said, "Home is where you can be fully realized." And it wasn't until I was older and read the story of Abraham and Sarah and Lech Lecha, and I thought, oh my gosh, here the birth of our religion began with having to leave your birthplace, your home, your parents' ancestral house, and to build a new home, a place where you could be, where you could fulfill God's mission for you in the world. So America is that place for me. It's a place where I can be a mixed race child. I can be a Reformed Jew. A place where I can actually become a rabbi of a congregation, and I can have that acceptance and that love and that sense of freedom. And so I don't know that there's another place in the world where I could be a female Reform Korean rabbi, except for America. So that is home for me. Home is where you can be, I think, fully realized.
And that's the blessing of America. So then when you look across to Israel, what do you feel?
So I feel a deep sense of connection, and I also felt a sense of home when I first came here. And I can't tell you exactly why, because it was very complicated. My first trip, I was 16. It was 1989. It was the first Intifada. I remember that children had never seen an Asian, so they would yell after me, Yaponit, Yaponit, which by the way is like the worst thing to call a Korean is a Japanese person. And I remember that also there was no like reform was almost like a curse, being reforming.
So you were a double stranger.
I was such an other in this land. And not only was I other, but to so many Israelis or ultra-nationalists, I was not just the other, I was the enemy. And so despite all of that, I still felt like I had a claim to this land, and this land has a claim on me. And so I can't explain exactly why I feel that way, but I love this place. I'm not sure that it's always been reciprocated, right. But I continue to love this place deeply, and I want to continue to feel at home here.
And Dotan, you know, part of this challenge of having two homes is also that we have two languages, and we have to make sure that we can speak to each other despite that. So I'm going to ask you a question, you'll answer in Hebrew. I want to ask that question in the reverse. What makes Israel home for you, for the Jewish people? What does it mean when we talk about it as home? And if it is home, who is Angela to you? Who are American Jews to you, or Jews around the world to you?
וואי, אוקיי, אז אני אתחיל ממני. בשבילי זה הבית, אני דור חמישי בישראל. סבא רבא שלי נולד כאן, סבא וסבתא שלי, ההורים שלי, מצד אחד, מצד שני, רק אבא שלי, ההורים שלו נולדו במזרח אירופה. אבל הבית זה השפה, זה הנוף, זה הקיבוץ שגדלתי בו. זה שכל המשפחה קרובה, שאנחנו חיים ביחד בתוך קהילה אחת, נפגשים, צוחקים, שרים שירים בעברית, חוגגים פסח ביחד, חוגגים קבלות שבת, סוכות, עושים סוכה, בשבועות מביאים ביקורים בטקס של הקיבוץ. זה תחושת הבית, תחושה שאני חלק מהאדמה הזאת, ממש כמו איזה, כאילו צמחתי כאן וגדלתי כאן מאז ומעולם, בדיוק, כמו איזה צמח. ובמובן הזה זה הכי טבעי לי שישראל, שאני חלק מישראל וישראל היא חלק ממני. אני כבר נולדתי לתוך מציאות, נולדתי אחרי מלחמת ששת הימים, לתוך מציאות של ישראל גדולה וחזקה ויחסית. ובעצם כשהגעתי לארצות הברית, פעם ראשונה במפגש עם קהילה יהודית, עם אנשים כמו אנג'לה, אני הייתי בהלם. הרגשתי שחלק ענק מהיהדות שלי ומהזהות שלי לא הכרתי. ואולי אפילו הסתירו ממני. לא בכוונה, אף אחד לא... אבל זאת הייתה הרגשה שלי, שאני מגלה עולם שהוא כל כך עשיר, הוא כל כך מקסים. הוא בעברית ובאנגלית, בעברית עם מבטא אמריקאי, שזה גם קצת מצחיק, אבל זה גם קצת מעורר השתאות, כי יהודים אמריקאים מתפללים בעברית, משתמשים במילים עבריות, שאני מדברת אותם ביום-יום, והם עושים את זה גם אם הם לא יודעים עברית ממש.
זה מעניין שלא הכרת את זה, כן? למה לא הכרת את זה? האם יש משהו בסיפור של ישראל כבית לישראלים, שבאיזשהו אופן מונע מאיתנו את היכולת לספר את הסיפור של הבית השני?
לפחות כשאני גדלתי, אני גדלתי בשנות ה-70, בשנות ה-80, ממש, כלומר, יהדות התפוצות, הם פשוט עוד לא הבינו את העניין, הם יבואו, זה רק שאלה של זמן, ואיך הם לא מבינים, הגולה נגמרה, יש מדינת ישראל, אנחנו ריבונים לעצמנו, אנחנו אחראים, יש לנו צבא, יש לנו המנון, יש לנו דגל, זה הבית של העם היהודי, והם בדילי, כי נוח להם, כי הם לא שמו לב, אבל הם מגיעים, ככה אני גדלתי.
כן, ואיך זה השתנה?
זה מאוד השתנה, אני מרגישה, ככה, אפרופו מה שאתה אמרת על שני הבתים, אני מרגישה שכל תפיסת העולם בעיניי שלי, ובכלל, משתנה וגם צריכה להשתנות. השפה צריכה להיות אחרת. בכלל, העולם היהודי לא הכיר את המצב שאנחנו נמצאים בו היום, שיש גם ריבונות יהודית חזקה, שיש תפוצה, מרכז יהודי בטוח, שחי בביטחון וחלק מכל מה שקורה שם בצפון אמריקה. וכל השפה שאנחנו מדברים בה היא עדיין שפה או מקראית, או משנאית, או תלמודית, או ימי ביניים שהיא של גלות, ושל מיעוט לעומת רוב ודברים כאלה. הכל השתנה. חוץ מזה שהשתנו גם המון דברים בעולם.
So in a way, both of you spoke about home in actually quite similar terms. It's a place where you feel comfortable, you can kind of let go, you feel natural in the place. And I think when you think about the idea of home, for all of us, it's a place where you let down your guard and you kind of let yourself be. You don't have to worry how people look at you. But here's the paradox. When you have two homes and you want to build a relationship between you, then is it enough just to say, oh, let down your guard, or do you actually have expectations that the other home has to meet for you, the other place has to meet for you, so that you can sustain a relationship with it? What does it take, Angela, for you, for Israel? What do you expect of Israel to do in its home? What do you ask Dotan to do to make you feel in relationship with it and not feel estranged? And Dotan in the reverse. Angela.
It's such a beautiful story of how you feel at home. But in many ways, aside from, I guess, a connection to the land, it could be the story of Jews in America too. You know, it's where you feel at home, it's where your family is, it's where you celebrate. And I guess the thing that would feel very different for me is if it felt like the ways that we express our Judaism in America would be valid when we're here. I think that's the biggest obstacle. I am completely understanding that that there are different ways. I actually feel it's a shame that Israelis don't have what seem like as many options to be Jewish as we have in America. But Dafka, it's not just not having the options, but actually looking down at what we're doing here and saying that's not real Judaism.
Dotan, what do you need from American Jews?
כן, מה שהייתי רוצה או זקוקה מהיהודים האמריקאים זה שיאהבו אותנו. שיבינו, אני חושבת שזה קורה בגדול, אבל שיבינו שאנחנו חיים פה במציאות מאוד מורכבת, שלא ימהרו לשפוט אותנו על... החיים פה במזרח התיכון הם לא פשוטים לכולם, לא רק לישראל, וישראל בטח, ואני מרגישה הרבה פעמים שיהדות ארצות הברית, גם מכל הקשת, לפעמים שופטת אותנו מהר מדי, וכמו אחים לאותה משפחה, או אחיות במקרה שלנו, הייתי רוצה שתהיה אהבה, גם אם אנחנו מתווכחים. כלומר, אני אשמח לקבל ביקורת ולקבל הוכחה, ולדבר, אבל הרבה אהבה ושמחה בעצם היותנו שתי אחיות קיימות וחזקות ובטוחות בעצמן. זה ככה מחשבה שלי.
Let me ask you, I'll push you just a little bit. Does it bother you at all when American Jews speak of America as at home in a sense that's equal to Israel? I mean, after all, Israel is Tzion. Mitzion tetzeh Torah. This is the cradle of our story. And the idea that the language that American Jews increasingly maybe even adopt, as if there's a kind of parity between these two Jewish experiences, does it get under your skin at all?
אם היית שואל אותי לפני, לא יודעת, הרבה שנים, כמה שנים, הייתי אולי אומרת, כן, זה קצת מטריד אותי. היום אני חושבת שזה מטריד אותי מכיוון אחר. מטריד אותי שאין לנו עוד את השפה שמבינה את מה שקורה. אני רוצה לקבל את האמירה של יהדות ארצות הברית, או יהדות אמריקה, גם קנדה, שהם מרגישים בבית. אני מאמינה שזה מה שהם מרגישים.
And can I just say that I find it striking that, I won't name who it is, but it's an Israeli diplomat that sends his kid to the same Jewish day school where my children attend. And he said to me, my daughter has learned more about Judaism in 2 years at this school than all her life living in Israel. And I said, that is such a shame. and so I would also say there's what that we could each teach. And I'm right now not sure that who I am or the community that I serve could be fully realized Jews living in Israel right now. That's a painful and horrible thing to say, but I don't think that yet there is a life for them to have a fulfilled Jewish life in the way they see it, with the values that they carry in the world that they're holding. in Israel right now.
Dotan, what Angela is saying in a way turned things on its head for a lot of Israeli Jews, right? They're thinking that we are the ones from Mitzion Tetzet Torah, from Zion the Torah is coming out. And is it possible that, how do you respond to that idea that perhaps the relationship with American Jewry can actually enrich Judaism in Israel and not the reverse?
בוודאות יכולים בעיניי להשאיר את החיים בישראל. באמת כל ההתחדשות היהודית או היצירתיות היהודית שקורית באמריקה היא מאוד חשובה לנו, בעיקר באמת בצד הליברלי שמאפשר גוונים שונים של יהדות. אני מרגישה שזה משהו שיש מה ללמוד מיהדות התפוצות. יש כמובן גם הרבה מה ללמוד מאיתנו, כלומר אני לא מרגישה שיהדות ישראל היא נחותה יותר, או יש פה יצירה יהודית, שוב, אני באה מקיבוץ, בקיבוצים יש יצירה יהודית מדהימה של חגים, גם חקלאיים וגם, לא רק בקיבוצים, גם בהרבה מקומות אחרים בארץ. כלומר, יש פה יצירה מקבילה ליצירה עם יהדות ארצות הברית, שהיא נהדרת ויש מה ללמוד ממנה. אבל בהחלט אני הייתי מאוד רוצה את הקול הליברלי שמאפשר חיים יהודים שונים, גם בישראל באופן חזק יותר. אני באמת מרגישה שזה הפסד גדול שלנו כיהודים ישראלים, שהמקום של היהדות הליברלית, התנועה הרפורמית, התנועה הקונסרבטיבית, תנועות אחרות, בין לבין, רצף, פחות קיים.
In the lecture, I spoke about how these two homes are developing in very different conditions, dealing with different challenges. Israel in a volatile Middle East, a majority in a sovereign homeland, and American Jews a thriving minority, but in a pretty fragmented democracy. They're welcomed, but there's a lot going on in America today. And in a way, these two homes are undergoing very different experiences, and even sometimes are in some kind of competition, if not threat with one another, right? See each other as some kind of obstacle. And I guess the challenge is, how do you sustain a sense of peoplehood in that reality?
Well, I think to begin, American Jews, Israeli Jews, these are not monolithic categories. And I think that you don't have to dig much beyond the surface to know that. And so I think when we start talking in these categories, sometimes we oversimplify, like what Israelis think, what Americans think, and there is such a range. And I also think that one of the things that we're negotiating in a modern era is that almost everyone is negotiating multiple identities. Some of them, like mine, are evident on my face or in my name, but people are almost always juggling those things, being a woman, being Hiloni. For, Dotan, she doesn't fit in an easy Israeli box either. And so I think that there are ways that we're all trying to negotiate that. So I guess first an understanding of the complexity of all those categories, that we're not just lumping people together. But I think that one of the beautiful things that I learned in this recent time I had studying with Israeli rabbis is that while we have a shared language, which is not just Hebrew, although because we can do that, but the shared language is our text. And I found that when we were able actually to come back to our shared text, that there was a way that we could connect to our peoplehood in a way that was beyond politics, beyond religious ritual, and it reminded us of our shared story. And with that shared Jewish memory, I think that we can build our peoplehood.
Yeah, that's a lovely thought, because in a way, what we are living out today is in a way an echo of Jews also going through different experiences throughout history, but with a reference point or arguing about the same issues. One of the ways people could define Jewish peoplehood is that Jews are the people who argue about what Jewish peoplehood is for and what it's about. And maybe that can help us to deal with this challenge and blessing of two homes.
I think that's what it is to be a Jew, to struggle with those questions. That to me is fundamentally at the foundation, and that we get to struggle and be in this conversation with centuries of Jews and with each other is such a privilege.
Angela, Dotan, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Reactions to what we heard from Dotan and Angela. Does anything resonate with you? Do you want to push back? Do you have a question that you would want to ask them?
Two thoughts that came to mind. One was, as an American Jew, we have to try harder to be Jewish. We live in a world that's not Jewish. And the other thought that ran through my head was, what would Israelis think of American Jews if American Jews were not as philanthropic as they are?
So yeah, so Marcy, right? It's easy to live a Jewish life in Israel, right? Things are closed on Shabbat. You have to think about, oh, do I have to get home to get that bus, right? There's a Jewish time. You study Hebrew, so right, the texts are easier to read. You study Talmud, you study Torah, Tanakh in your schools. We have to put the work. There's like an additional thing for us to do, right? Even if you're a secular Jew in Israel, you're Jewish because of the things you've learned, the things you eat. Now it's easier to get non-kosher food in Israel, but we work hard, and I don't think they've really brought that out as much in that. I think that's a really key point, Marcy, to say, like, yeah, the Jewish people. Yeah, Mark, please.
What you just said, I'm just wondering, what you just said is that you're Jewish in Israel, regardless of whether you go to synagogue or don't go to synagogue.
Right, unless you're a different, and when I say, as Angela said, there's complexities of Israel too.
So is that one way to define Jewish peoplehood? It has something to do with religion, but not everything to do with religion. Okay, so it struck me as I think that's why we have problems. I do figuring out what Jewish peoplehood really is, and listening to the two rabbis. It seemed to me they were coming at it at slightly different ways. Central Synagogue Rabbi was talking about how she's hurt by not being able to be the Jew that she wants to be. And the Israeli rabbi was talking about, it's the land. This is where I live. And I think they were both trying to figure out how they could have a dialogue.
Which is amazing, right? There are two rabbis who believe strongly in the state of Israel, and they might, do we even have the same language, right? I think they were trying to get to that, right? Yes, they care about each other. I believe many Israeli Jews care about North American Jews as well, and their hearts break when they see anti-Semitic incidents happen. I think they have a feeling because they're Jewish as well. But when tragedy doesn't strike us, when tragedy or events around our communities don't hurt, do we have that? Do we feel a connection to each other? I'm not sure. Carol and Phyllis, yeah.
I think a lot has happened in recent years as far as Israel moving to the right. That has affected a lot of feelings of Reform Jews, conservative Jews about Israel. I think when there wasn't such a division within Israel, and when the Orthodox were not making themselves so iron-fisted about things, it was easier, I feel, to feel good about Israel. It's harder now because things that they're doing, not only do I find it morally wrong, but they're alienating me as a Jew who has always had very strong feelings for Israel. So that's a real problem on that side.
Right. And Angela kind of highlighted that, right? If you don't accept the Judaism that I'm working hard to practice here in my country, in North America, and you look down upon me, not just accept it, and not every Jewish community. How can I feel a connection? How can I feel a connection to the land or to the people when there's a challenge? I just went off of that. I think there's a challenge because both are thriving, right? Israel's thriving. It's a startup nation. We look at the vaccine reports. Things are good in Israel, right? They're used to, there's a culture, there's the arts, and I would say there's a slowly burgeoning Reform Jewish community there too. Things are good, and things are good for Jews here as well, right? There may be a rise of anti-Semitism, or there is a rise of anti-Semitism, but we can do whatever we want in America, right? We can join almost any organization that we want. We can go to almost any school we want, and right, there are challenges that we face, but things I would say are pretty optimistic for Jews. We can hide our Judaism, and of course, we have more security at our synagogue than we have ever had before. And of course, there are people that hate us. But on a day-to-day life, things are pretty good for us. We have made it in North America. So when we have two thriving communities, or two communities, there's a challenge to say, yes, is one better than the other, or how do we mesh those thriving communities as well? Phyllis, you have a thought.
Well, on a different comment that Angela said, I was very interested when she said a diplomat told her that his children in the same school as her children in New York City, I gather, learn more about Judaism 2 years here than they would have in Israel. What is that saying?
Right. So, right, what does that mean? So, like, is it they're learning more about Judaism, how Judaism is practiced
or the history?
Or is it the history? Right. Right. I know that you learn Tanakh, you learn Talmud, but you learn history, right? So I wonder, like, I want to know more about that as well. But they're teaching it differently because it's additional. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think there might also be a factor of when it's all around you and you just absorb it practically by osmosis, there isn't the need to actually study it the way we do because it's there. So you kind of don't have to as much. It kind of makes me think, I know when my daughter was choosing colleges, it was between an incredibly expensive school with a really big Jewish population and a place that gave her a good scholarship with a tiny Jewish population. And she became really active in Hillel. And she said if she had gone to the school with a large population, there's a good chance she wouldn't even have gone to Hillel. And instead she was at this tiny school where she made sure there was a Hillel. And I think it's a similar kind of thing where there isn't the need, and so you kind of take it for granted.
Yeah.
So I think a lot of American Jews, perhaps even our generation, don't realize that this is not the Israel we grew up with. Israel is all grown up. It can take care of itself. It doesn't depend on America as much. And I think that may be reflected in the attitudes they have when Americans give them advice.
Yeah, 100%.
Tell them you have to be more like us. They'll say, what do you mean? You're disappearing. You're all intermarrying. We don't have to listen to you.
Right.
So,
it's not an underdog story anymore.
I'm all grown up, Mom. Don't tell me what to do.
And the comment of I don't know who it was at Hartman or Yossi Klein Halevi said, tell us what you think. Don't tell us what to do.
Right.
So I thought that was so interesting.
But there's a challenge there, right? So if we find that if it's our home, right? If we have two homes, I want to make sure that the home if I don't like that home, I'm not going back there, right? Or I don't want to feel connected to it. And so, right, Israel is not the underdog anymore. Israel has gone through challenges, and now they are successful, and they have made peace with countries without our help, right? It has the safety, their technology. While there's always an existential threat to them, they've been able to navigate it by themselves. Not in the beginning, and American Jews needed to support them financially, and we still do, but they're able to have that. But I think that leads, Mark, exactly to, do we feel at home when they might not take our advice? And I think what's interesting, what Zotan was saying, that she needs North American Jews to love us. She said so they can share criticism as well, but they need us to love us as well. And that's the whole debate. What is the role of North American Jews in the land that we can move there? We have the ability to move there, and then we can speak out about it. But are we allowed to speak out about it here as well? Is it really our home?
I think when I was growing up and younger, it was important to give money to Israel. They needed it, and you had Israel bonds and all of that. And then you started hearing from people in Israel, in tech companies, we don't need your money. We don't need your money. We don't want to feel like, we're the poor relative that you have to help us. That's not, they want to be in a more equal relationship. And we're still wanting to give to our poor cousins.
Yes, Betty.
Yes, I would just like to say that when I grew up in upstate New York in an Orthodox family, one of very few, my father, who was from Poland, said, when I die, I want to be buried in Israel. And he sent his money to some organization, and my sister and I were very skeptical about, and he did it. And when Steve and I went to Israel, we went to visit his grave, and it was very emotional, and I felt an immediate physical connection to Israel, and there literally was one. And that's the only time I've been to Israel, but it was so touching to be there and feel what he was aspiring to. So I just wanted to share that.
Absolutely.
But if you're a Reformed Jew and you want to be buried in Israel, you cannot have a ceremony by your rabbi.
Is that true? I don't know, because he died very suddenly and buried without us.
Can officiate at a funeral.
Yeah, so those are the challenges, right? So is it your home, Carol, right? You said, oh, it's my spirit. And I'm a little surprised you even said it earlier, it was your spiritual home. Could it be a spiritual? And I think what we're missing from the conversation is North America. Is there importance to North American Jewry as well? Right?
Is there Is
there an importance to North American Jewry or global Jewry? I don't like saying diaspora, right? We are diaspora, but there's global Jewry outside of Israel Jewry. Is there an importance for us there? And here's Jacob Blaustein, the voice of reason. He addresses the American Jewish Committee's executive committee. Can someone read this for me?
There are a few unthinking Jewish nationalists who appear to want to assign to Israel the role of ingathering Jews from all over the world in the false belief that Jewish life outside of Israel, in exile, as they put it, is without spiritual value, cultural significance, or hope of personal or group security. We repudiate vigorously the suggestion that American Jews are in exile. The future of American Jewry, of our children and our children's children, is entirely linked with the future of America. We have no alternative, and we want no alternative.
So Blaustein is kind of the Jeremiah of the moment in the 1950s, right? We need to have a land here. There could be there's spiritual value, there's cultural significance, and there's hope of personal or group security here in America as well. And I think sometimes we think, oh, only perhaps that can happen in Israel. But maybe we need both. We need these two homes. We have these two homes for make Judaism more modern, or to make Judaism a place that we can have a safe harbor. But how do we talk about them? How do we interact when sometimes we don't agree? I think the beginning is by thinking about this conversation and starting this conversation of what does it mean to have two homes, or a spiritual home, or a place where I can find refuge if I need to. But it's more than that. It's a place, these homes are places where Judaism has developed and continues to develop. And are they equal in our Jewish development, in our religion, in our culture, or does one tip the scales differently?
I'd just like to add a comment. Phyllis's comment about her grandchildren, you hear a lot. What is college life like for kids? How much more anti-Semitic is it on college campuses? How uncomfortable is it on college campuses for Jewish kids today from 15 years ago? So I have this discussion without going after what the progressive are doing, anti-Semitic things, and how that all was turning out on college campuses is a big part of this discussion.
Yeah, so I'm going to push you, David. I don't know if that's the reason why people perhaps my age or your grandchildren don't feel connected to Israel.
No, you're angry. I don't blame you because of the political situation in Israel. They don't respect Reform Jews, and I don't blame you for that.
But I think I would say, and I heard this from I don't remember who on the call, but I think there was a Mark. It was from Mark. There was a longing. Israel was a younger country. They were developing, and we needed to be there to support them and support the country. And so I think that there was more investment into the development and the history and the creation of the state when I was younger. And I don't think we have that investment as much either. Gene, I see your hand.
Yeah, the point I was going to make, very much the same point, is that to me, this is very much a generational conversation. Our generation, I think most of us are, other than you, Rabbi, you're the youngster here.
I know, I think David's the grandson.
Yeah, no, seriously though, we grew up with a post-Holocaust survivor generation. We grew up with Israel having just formed in 47. Our children and grandchildren have not experienced what we experienced. We see Israel, and many of us have mentioned this, as a safe harbor, if you will. Our children and grandchildren see the United States as a safe harbor, notwithstanding anti-Semitism. I don't think they see that as the danger that we see it. We have raised our children based on, for the most part, a liberal philosophy, and they are appalled by what they see in Israel. I can't tell you the outrage that my daughter and granddaughters felt that when we couldn't walk to the Kotel together. I mean, they were outraged. Their outrage affected me. I guess my generation kind of accepted it because that's the way it was. They were outraged and made me outraged. So when we talk about how to create peoplehood now between Israel and the North American Jewry, we have to look at it from the perspective of our kids and grandchildren, not from our perspective.
Right. And I would agree with also David was saying, right, Israel's held to a different standard on college campuses for sure. And not just in college campuses, but in many other circles in the United Nations. And I think there's a challenge there. And I think that has tainted many of my generation's feelings towards Israel. I don't think that's the main reason why there is not a connection. I think what Gene, you are saying, it's not an underdog story. I don't need to feel invested as much. And I think that partly that is a bigger reason why there's not a strong sense of a Jewish peoplehood in Israel as much as it has been as well. So we're going to continue these conversations. We're going to actually get into more specific ideas about how Jews in North America and Jews in Israel can work. What is our role? What is our relationship to Israel? How do we strengthen it? I think it's important to strengthen our relationship. And do North American Jews have a say? Do North American Jews have a connection? Is there even such thing as Jewish peoplehood? Or is it just separate Jewish communities? Do you feel, my whole rabbinic thesis was on Klal Yisrael, on Jewish peoplehood, and can we develop that? Sometimes I felt a stronger connection to Jewish people who are not in Israel, but in the former Soviet Union or in South America, because I felt more similar to them, but they were learning similar things to me than those Jews in Israel. How do I strengthen that? I think, how do we strengthen Jewish people in Israel and North America is an essential conversation to continue to have. So you're going to get another lecture by the Hartman Institute. This is their curriculum, so if you have feedback or thoughts, please let me know so I can share with them as well. They're continuing to create, we'll look at text and highlight things. The other upcoming Israeli programs, you're going to get an email about that. We also just started an Israeli engagement committee, so if you're interested in joining us for that, that would be awesome. That's going to help us with programs in the future. These were on the calendar way back when, but they kind of stemmed from me, and I would love more people involved in the planning. But next week is Yom HaAtzmaut. On Thursday, we're going to have falafel lunch. So if you want to swing by the temple and listen to some Israeli music and get a falafel, sit in our tent, separate from each other, and meet our new executive director. That's a Thursday from 11:30 to 1:30. So stop by there. Cantor Anna Ott is going to teach a class on music, and I'm not remembering the exact things. We should be getting an email about that, as well as we have a Israeli author, a famous Israeli author, coming next Sunday too. So look forward to continuing the conversation. Be safe, be healthy, and Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat
Shalom.
Shabbat
Thank
Shalom.
you.
Bye.
This is wonderful, Rabbi. Wonderful.
Yes.
I will let the Hartman Institute know. So.
Easy.